Welcome everyone to this tutorial series. I'm going to teach you how to make a simple game in C++. This series is targeted at beginners who have a little understanding of C and C++ or programming in general, who wants to learn how to make games. At the end of the series, you'll have a game of your own and hopefully knowledge to make more games that you want. So when we say create a game, what actually are we creating? Well, games are just a piece of software, an executable that people can double-click and launch. So we want to create an .exe file to share and publish. So how do we generate that? Well, that's where the compiler comes in. Compiler is a program that takes in some text or code specified by some programming language like C++ and outputs an executable. But the question is, what does a game code look like? Imagine your favorite game. It probably has nice graphics and great controls with gamepad or keyboard and mouse. It also has awesome enemies and interesting levels. We can organize in pretty much 3 categories. Input is when the player interacts with the game. Simulation, when the game creates and updates the world, enemies, bullets, collisions, everything. And the rendering, which is taking that world and displaying to the player via video and audio. And because games are real-time software, which means that the user is constantly interacting and expect near immediate results, we keep doing these 3 things for as long as the game is running. That's the base of the game loop. Gather input, simulate the game, display it, then do it all over again. But the game is comprised of a lot of systems, right? You heard about the game's rendering engine, physics engine, animation system, and so on. How does that fit together? You have to understand that games, just like any software we write, are just instructions for the hardware to execute. For example, an Intel x64 CPU, an NVIDIA GPU, things like that. That's what is in the very bottom level of our program. But we don't talk to the hardware directly. Some of them, like the GPU, we can't even write to it directly. We go through the drivers, which are pieces of software that hardware manufacturers create to make it possible to communicate with their hardware. But again, we don't communicate with them ourselves. The software that does that connection is the operating system, OS. And that's where we come in. We just write our software on top of this stack and use the operating system whenever we need to. Like, if you need to display some graphics on the screen, we have to ask the operating system. Same for audio, input, files, and other fundamental things. But there's a problem, right? We want our game to run on multiple platforms. Maybe Windows, Linux, and Macs, maybe consoles as well, maybe Android and iOS. And we certainly don't want to rewrite the game for every platform we want to ship on. In order to avoid that, we're going to separate our program into a platform-dependent part that interfaces with the OS and the platform-independent part that doesn't care where it's running on. And that platform-independent part will have all the systems our game needs: rendering, physics, math, assets, game object systems, and whatever else. These systems can be written by hand or licensed to be used in the game. And at the very top lies our gameplay code that controls things specific to the game, like weapons, power-ups, puzzles, etc. See that most of the things down here can be copied from game to game, at least on a basic level. That's where a game engine comes in. The game engine is a collection of systems that most games need in order to have its gameplay. So when we make a game using Unity or Unreal, we have a lot of game systems there for us to use, and the challenge becomes learning how to use these systems. In our game, we're going to write the whole thing, including the game engine. It's not only great to learn programming, but also because our game is so simple that we don't need most of the systems that exist in a commercial engine. And when we do use a generic game engine, we'll know exactly what systems our game needs and the limitations of each one. Also, it's really fun to build the whole thing. Now that you have an understanding of how games are programmed, we can get started. Remember that it's the compiler that will transform the text into the executable, so we need a compiler. In Windows, the most used C++ compiler is MSVC, Microsoft Visual C++. So let's go ahead and install Visual Studio. So I'm just going to search download Visual Studio and go to Microsoft's site. There, I can select the community version, which is a free download. So let's run the installer. When we get to this window, we're going to come down here and choose Game Development using C++. As you can see, it's going to download and install the compiler we need, and also the Windows SDK to develop to that platform. So I'm just going to click Install. Let's wait. Okay, it's done. I'm going to sign in later. I'll choose a dark one. Easier on the eyes. Let's see. There you have it. Let's create a simple Hello World program, just to make sure everything's working. So I'm going to click Create a New Project. Select the empty project, and let's call it Hello World. That's the cliche one. I'm going to select a folder, and let's create. There you go. Like I said, our program is just text that we're going to send to the compiler. So let's create a new file to write the text in. I'm going to right click on the project, select add, new item. Let's do a C++ file. Let's call this main. Since this is just text, we can write whatever we want here. Then we can save with Ctrl S and press this green button here, or F5, to compile and run the project. So Visual Studio tried to compile, we just transformed our text into a valid program, and there was an error. So yeah, because this doesn't make sense. So now we're going to have to type text that makes sense for the C++ compiler, and then generate the executable. I hope you're already a little bit familiar with C++, so I'm just going to type a very simple hello program. So I'm going to need an entry point, which is where our program starts, and I'm going to include the standard library so we can print a message. I'm going to call the printf function and type hello world. Now I'm going to save and press F5, let's see. There you have it. That's our program. We can also press F10 to step into our program line by line. That can be pretty useful as well when you're trying to debug the program, so you have to know exactly what's going on. So at this point we should print. And we do print. And then we exit the program. So now make sure you are on the same page here, that you download the Visual Studio, that you can compile and run a simple program so we can build the game together. And that is what we're going to start in the next lesson. I'll see you then.